The string quartet stopped mid-measure, not a natural pause between movements. A full stop, like someone had yanked the needle off a record. And in that silence, I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath from 3 tables away. I was standing in the doorway of the Rosewood Room at the Fairmont Hotel in Vancouver, holding a small clutch bag, wearing my Canadian Armed Forces dress uniform, the dark green jacket, the gold buttons, the service ribbons above my left breast pocket, my hair pinned up under my wedge cap. 143 guests turned to look at me. I want to tell you this story from the beginning, because if I just tell you about that moment in the doorway, you'll think I was trying to make a scene. And I need you to understand that was the last thing I wanted. My name is Megan. I'm a captain in the Canadian Army, currently posted at CFB Esquimalt after 2 tours overseas. I grew up in Kelowna, British Columbia, the second of 3 kids, sandwiched between my older brother and my younger sister. My father ran a successful commercial real estate brokerage on Bernard Avenue. My mother taught piano to neighborhood kids out of our sunroom until I was about 12, then stopped because she didn't need to anymore. We were comfortable. More than comfortable. My brother's name is Ryan. He is 34, charming in the way that golden retrievers are charming. Effortlessly, without trying, in a way that makes you forgive everything. He sells software solutions to mid-sized companies across Western Canada and does very well at it. He has a big laugh and an easy smile, and he never once had to fight for anyone's attention in any room he walked into. I was the one who sat in the back corner of family dinners quietly reading about the Battle of Vimy Ridge. I enrolled at Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston at 18. My father drove me to the airport himself, which I thought was meaningful until he mentioned, somewhere over the Rockies in my mind, that he had a property showing in Penticton that afternoon and needed the car back by 2. He kissed me on the cheek at the departures curb. My mother had stayed home. She said airports made her anxious. I'm not saying this to make them sound like villains. I'm saying it because you need to understand the baseline. The baseline was, Megan's fine, Megan's always fine, Megan doesn't need much from us. RMC was hard. Not in the way people imagine. The physical part I actually loved. Early mornings, cold runs along the Kingston waterfront, the particular satisfaction of your body doing exactly what you tell it to. What was hard was being so far from anything familiar and understanding, slowly, that familiar hadn't been particularly warm to begin with. I graduated in the top quarter of my class. My parents flew out for the ceremony. My father took exactly 2 photos on his phone before the battery died. My mother said my uniform made me look severe. Still, I was proud. I am still proud. My first tour was in Latvia, part of Operation Reassurance, NATO Forward Presence, mostly logistical coordination, some joint training exercises with our Baltic allies. Cold, in a way that made Kelowna winters feel like a joke. I came back quieter than I left. My second tour was harder. I won't go into details here because that's not really what the story is about. But I will say that I came back from it with a mention in dispatches and a different relationship to silence. A mention in dispatches. For those unfamiliar, it's a formal recognition of distinguished service or gallantry, recorded in official reports sent to the Governor General. It appears on my service record. There's a small bronze leaf worn on the appropriate service ribbon. It doesn't come easily. It's not the kind of thing you hand out for showing up on time. I don't say this to brag. I say this because it becomes relevant. Ryan got engaged to Stephanie in January of last year. Stephanie is lovely. Genuinely lovely. A speech-language pathologist from North Vancouver, careful and kind, with a dry sense of humor that surprised me the first time I heard it. I liked her immediately. I was happy for my brother in the way you can be genuinely happy for someone even when you are quietly aware that the universe applies different rules to different people. The wedding was set for July. The Fairmont in downtown Vancouver. 143 guests. A 3-course dinner, a string quartet, a custom floral installation that my mother mentioned approximately 47 times between January and July. I was asked to be a groomsman. Ryan's idea. Which I thought was a nice gesture until I understood that what he actually meant was that he wanted me in a bridesmaid dress on Stephanie's side. It's just easier visually, he said over the phone in March. For the photos. You know how Mom is about symmetry. I said I understood. I did understand. I just also understood what it meant. In May, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. I was at my kitchen table in Esquimalt, marking up a training schedule, and I almost didn't answer because I was in the middle of a thought. I answered anyway. This is something I have always done. Answered anyway. Megan. Honey. She had a particular tone she used for difficult requests. Light, almost cheerful, like she was offering me something pleasant. I've been thinking about the wedding, and I just want to make sure we've all talked about the uniform question. I put down my pen. What uniform question? Well, a pause. You know how Ryan and Stephanie have worked so hard on the aesthetic. The whole thing is very cohesive, blush and sage and cream. And of course, we're all so proud at everything you've done, you know that. But a military uniform in those photos, it might feel a little jarring. A little, I don't know how to say this, out of place. I sat with that for a moment. Out of place, Mom, I said. My uniform is what I wear to formal occasions. That's what it's for. Of course. I'm just thinking about Stephanie's vision for the day. She's worked with that photographer from West Vancouver, the one who did the Hendersons' wedding, and the photos are going to be so beautiful, and I just think, has Stephanie said anything to you about this? Another pause. Longer. Not in so many words. I found out later that Stephanie had said nothing, that the concern was entirely my mother's, that Stephanie, when Ryan eventually mentioned it to her, said, "Why on earth would I care? It's Megan. She should wear whatever she wants. Stephanie is, as I said, genuinely lovely." But I didn't know that yet in May. In May, I just said I would think about it, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I called my best friend Lena, who has been my best friend since we were assigned to the same bunk at RMC in first year, and discovered we had both packed the complete works of Farley Mowat. Lena is now a major posted in Ottawa, which means she outranks me and enjoys reminding me of this approximately once per conversation. Your mother wants you to hide your uniform, Lena said. She wants me to be sensitive to the aesthetic. Megan. I know. Wear the uniform. There'll be a whole thing. There's already a whole thing. You're just the only one not making noise about it. She wasn't wrong. This is the thing about being the one who's always fine. Other people's discomfort gets managed loudly and in advance, and yours gets managed not at all, because everyone has already agreed that you'll be fine. I thought about it for 6 weeks. I want to be honest about that. I didn't just defiantly decide to show up in uniform. I genuinely considered the dress. I even looked at dresses. There's a photograph on my phone of me standing in a change room in Langford wearing a sage green midi dress that made me look like someone who had wandered away from a garden party and forgotten how to get back. I thought about all the times I had made myself smaller to fit the space I was given. The Christmas I came home from Latvia and my father spent dinner asking Ryan about his Q3 numbers. The time I mentioned, quietly, that I had been recommended for a commendation, and my mother said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart," and immediately asked if I was still seeing that engineer from Victoria. The family group chat where Ryan's promotion at his company got 37 messages of congratulations, and my mention in dispatches got 4, 2 of which were from my aunt in Saskatoon, who I suspect had to Google what it meant. I thought about Vimy Ridge, about the 35598 Canadians who died in 4 days in April of 1917, so that this country could stand somewhere and be something. About the fact that I had spent 2 tours doing the same work, for the same reasons, in colder and more complicated places than anyone in my family would ever visit. I wore the uniform. I drove up from Esquimalt to Vancouver the day before, stayed with Lena's cousin in Kitsilano, and arrived at the Fairmont at 4:30 on a Saturday afternoon in July. The ceremony had gone beautifully. I had been seated with the family, not in the wedding party, which had been a quietly negotiated compromise that I had accepted with the same grace I accept most quietly negotiated compromises, which is to say, outwardly. The reception was in the Rosewood Room. I'd been to the Fairmont before for a mess dinner years ago, and I knew the room. High ceilings, warm sconces, the kind of space that rewards dressing up. I had touched up my hair in the lobby bathroom. straightened my cap, checked my ribbons in the mirror. I looked like myself, possibly the most like myself I had looked in years. And then I stood in the doorway and the string quartet stopped. I don't know why they stopped. I've wondered since. Maybe the lead violinist was a veteran. Maybe it was just a natural pause between pieces that happened to align perfectly with my entrance. Maybe the universe has a sense of timing that the rest of us are only dimly aware of. What I know is that in the silence, a man at a table near the window stood up. He was older, mid-70s I would have guessed, with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform and never quite lost it. He was wearing a dark suit and a Royal Canadian Legion poppy pin on his lapel. He stood up slowly, the way people do when their knees have opinions, and he looked at me across the room. Then he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mention in dispatches. Who's serving?" And the room changed. I didn't move for a second. I was still in the doorway. I said, "Captain Megan Calloway, sir. Second tour, 2023. And he nodded, very slowly, and he said, "Thank you for your service, Captain." And then 6 other people stood up, and then 4 more after that. And then 3 others from different tables who I later learned had served in different decades, different branches, different corners of the world. 13 people total on their feet in a room full of wedding guests in blush and sage and cream. The string quartet, bless them, started playing again. "O Canada," very softly. I don't know if that was planned or instinct, but half the room had their hands on their hearts before they seemed to realize they were doing it. I stood in that doorway for what felt like a long time. My face was very still. I have been trained to keep my face still. My mother was at a table to my left, 3 rows back. I did not look at her directly. I didn't need to. I could see, in my peripheral vision, the way she had gone very quiet. Not her usual quiet, not the quiet of someone planning what to say next. A different kind. The kind that comes from watching something happen that you didn't anticipate and can't manage. The man who had stood first made his way over to me after the initial moment had settled. His name was Howard. He had served with the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 2 tours in Bosnia in the 90s. We shook hands, and he asked about Esquimalt, and we talked for several minutes about the particular challenges of logistics coordination in Baltic weather, and he laughed at something I said, a real laugh. The kind that crinkles all the way up to the eyes. Ryan found me during cocktail hour. He came alone, without Stephanie, which I noticed. "Meg," he said. He called me Meg when he was being sincere. "I'm glad you wore it." I looked at him. "Are you?" "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck, the way he always does when he's working out how to say something. "Mom called me in June. I didn't handle that well. I should have said something. You didn't have to." "I kind of did, though." He was quiet for a moment. "I watched those guys stand up. I didn't know. I mean, I knew about the tour and the commendation thing, but I didn't." He stopped, started again. "I didn't know what it meant. I should have asked." I didn't say anything for a second. The honest answer was that he could have asked any time in the past 10 years and I would have told him. But Ryan has never been cruel. He's been careless the way people who have never had to fight for a room can be careless, without malice, without noticing. And careless is something you can come back from. "Now you know," I said. He nodded. "Now I know. My mother came to find me after dinner." The speeches were done. The first dance had happened. The cake had been cut. Stephanie had pressed a small piece into Ryan's face with enormous dignity. And the room had loosened into the easy noise of people who have eaten and drunk well and feel warmly toward each other. My mother sat down in the chair beside me without asking, which is her way. She looked at my ribbons for a long moment. Then she said, "What does the one on the left mean? The one with the small leaf?" I told her. I explained what a mention in dispatches was, what it required, what the process was, why it appeared in official records sent to the Governor General's office. I kept my voice level, not punishing, not warm, just factual. She listened the whole way through without interrupting, which for my mother is notable. When I finished, she said, "I didn't know." Not as an excuse, more like something landing. I genuinely didn't know. "I know you didn't," I said. "I should have." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She looked at her hands for a moment. My mother has always struggled with apologies. Not the saying of them, but the understanding that they need to be complete, that you can't soft pedal an apology and still expect it to do the work. But I saw her trying. I saw her wrestling with it in real time, which is more than I have sometimes seen. "I'm sorry, Megan," she said. I think I was afraid of not knowing what to say. So instead, I tried to make it smaller. She shook her head slightly. "That wasn't fair to you." I looked at her for a moment. At the lines around her eyes that weren't there when I left for Kingston. At the specific kind of tiredness that parents carry and don't talk about. "Okay," I said, and I meant it. Not that everything was resolved. Not that 15 years of being fine would suddenly become 15 years of being seen, but okay as in, there is a door here that wasn't open before, as in, we can try, as in, I am tired of holding things at a distance when I don't have to. Later that night, near the end of the reception, Howard found me again at the edge of the dance floor. He had his wife with him this time. A small, sharp-eyed woman named Barbara, who shook my hand with considerable force and said she had read about Operation Reassurance and thought the rotation schedule was unconscionable. I liked her immediately. Howard asked if I was staying in Vancouver long. "Just tonight," I said. "Back to Esquimalt tomorrow afternoon." He nodded. "Good posting," he said. "Beautiful part of the country." "It is," I agreed. He paused, looking out at the room. The string quartet had given way to a DJ by this point, and the dance floor had filled with the younger guests doing things with their arms that I had never learned the name for. Ryan was in the middle of it, his jacket off, his tie loosened, Stephanie laughing beside him with her shoes in her hand. "You know," Howard said, "I wore my uniform to my daughter's graduation, 1997. My wife thought I was being sentimental." He smiled. "But she told me later that 3 people came up to her during the reception and said it was the proudest moment they'd seen in years. Not because of the uniform, because of the way I stood in it." I thought about that. "The way you stand in it matters," he said. "Especially when someone's told you to take it off." I drove back to Esquimalt the next morning in the easy quiet of an August Sunday, the sea-to-sky highway opening up along the water, the mountains doing what they always do, which is exist so completely that it's almost rude. I had the windows down and the radio off. I was thinking about the room, about the moment the quartet stopped, about my mother's hands in her lap when she said I should have known, about how long I had been making myself easier to ignore. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being capable. People assume that because you can handle things, you don't need to be asked about them. That because you don't complain, you don't feel. That because you wear the uniform well, you don't need anyone to notice that you're wearing it. I thought about what Howard had said, about the way you stand in it. I have spent 12 years learning to stand in it. In the cold on a Latvian tarmac at 4 in the morning, in offices where decisions got made about people I was responsible for, in the silence after things happened that I will not describe at parties or family dinners because they don't fit there, and I have stopped trying to make them fit. I am not asking for a parade. I never was. I am asking, maybe, I think I am finally asking, to not have to apologize for taking up the space I have earned. The water off Horseshoe Bay was very flat that morning, silver and still. I took the long way through West Vancouver just to stay near it a little longer. Service isn't something you hide. Not at a wedding, not at a family dinner, not in the doorway of a beautiful room full of people in blush and sage and cream. It's not a costume and it's not a burden. And it is not, it has never been, something to manage around the aesthetic. It's who I am. It's who I chose to be. And if you are standing in a room and someone asks you to make that smaller, I hope you remember, somewhere in that room, someone already knows what you carry. Someone already knows what the ribbon means. You just have to walk through the door. I still think about the drive home along sea to sky, the water flat and silver, the mountains doing what they always do. There's something I've been sitting with since that day, and it's this. Nothing that happened at Ryan's wedding was an accident. Not the way Howard stood up, not the way the room shifted, not even the conversation my mother and I had afterward at that small table near the dance floor. Things like that don't come from nowhere. They come from years of small choices made quietly in the direction of something you believe in, even when no one around you seems to notice. I made a choice at 18 to sign my name to something larger than myself. I made that choice again every morning through 2 tours, through cold and distance and the particular loneliness of being competent in places that don't make it onto anyone's travel itinerary. And I made it again in July, standing in a Kitsilano bathroom, pinning my service ribbons straight before driving to a wedding where I already knew I was going to make someone uncomfortable. That's not stubbornness, or maybe it is, but it's the kind that comes from understanding, not from ego. I understood what the uniform meant. I understood what it had cost. And I understood that shrinking from it even once, even at a wedding, even to smooth over someone else's anxiety about symmetry in photographs, that would have been a kind of dishonesty I wasn't willing to carry home with me. I think about what Howard said, about the way you stand in it. He wasn't talking about posture. He was talking about the decision you make over and over to be honest about who you are, even in spaces that weren't built with you in mind. That's something I want to hold on to. Not as a lesson exactly, more like a compass reading. The people I respect most, Howard, Lena, the handful of officers I've served under who I would follow anywhere, they all share this quality. They know what they believe and they don't negotiate it away to make a room feel easier. Not because they're rigid, but because they've done the work of figuring out who they are and they've decided it's worth the discomfort of showing up as that person. My mother said she didn't know, and I believe her. I think there's a version of not knowing that is its own kind of failure, not malicious, but a failure of curiosity, a failure to ask the person sitting across from you at Christmas dinner what their life is actually like. I was guilty of it too, in a different direction. I'd spent so long assuming I wasn't worth asking about that I stopped offering. We had both been careless in our different ways. What I know now is that the truth has a way of surfacing when you stop working so hard to keep it underwater. Howard stood up because he recognized something real. The room followed because real things are recognizable, even when we haven't been introduced to them properly. I didn't wear the uniform to make a point. I wore it because it was honest, and honesty, I found, is the only thing that actually holds. The water off Horseshoe Bay was still when I drove past it. I had the windows down. I felt, for the first time in a long time, exactly the right size.